ThesisGate started in 2019, meaning 2021 will be the third year in which this controversy exists. 2021 will be a monumental year for ThesisGate because it will be the year where ThesisGate enters the courts and finally comes to a close. Accounts of Tsai's academic fraud are surfacing in international media outlets. Hong Kong's Yazhou Zoukan listed a number of controversies Tsai has been involved in a January 16th Facebook post. ThesisGate was part of that list. The UK's Computer Weekly also published an article in which it discusses whether or not the Freedom of Information Act is applicable to non-residents. The article cited independent American journalist Michael Richardson's battle with the UK's Information Commissioner's Office to access records related to Tsai's external examiners. We continuously call on Taiwan's presidential office to hold a press conference to address Tsai Ing-wen's part-time tenure at Soochow University in 1983 and the photograph with her sister in her autobiography. They have yet to make any sort of response. Tsai Ing-wen's organization refuses to admit defeat. Tsai installed her cousin-in-law as the head of Taiwan's High Administrative Court to oppress any civil servants who wish to come forward with the truth. Furthermore, the appointment also serves to slap down any cases that threaten to divulge Tsai's career files. Getting rid of physical files is not enough for Tsai and her people. They also want to erase her digital footprint. In the past, anyone could search for government records online. However, the government's archive database was overhauled and reworked on January 4th, 2021 to make the process a little more difficult. We used the Navigating Electronic Agencies' Records, or NEAR database to locate two important clues concerning Tsai's employment upon her return to Taiwan in 1983. Those two clues were important for helping us ultimately unearth Tsai's part-time position at Soochow University in 1983. NEAR went online in 2002. It allows members of the public to look up records of government files, which they can then request and acquire from authorities. According to the Freedom of Government Information Law, this law is enacted to establish the institution for the publication of government information, facilitate people to share and fairly utilize government information, protect people's right to know, further people's understanding, trust, and overseeing of public affairs, and encourage public participation and democracy. Also, government information shall be made available to the public actively in accordance with the law or provided as requested by any person. Just like how netizens helped reveal the truth behind Tsai's photo with her sister, netizens once again stepped up to the challenge in November 2019 and found the two clues that uncovered Tsai's time at Soochow University in 1983. One of the clues was a file that declined Tsai's request to teach at NCCU. We all know how this story goes. After NCCU turned her away, Tsai started teaching at Soochow University in August 1983 as an adjunct associate professor. The NEAR database turned out to be a detrimental loose end for Tsai Ing-wen. That's why the website was overhauled and its search protocols were changed. The presidential office once made a jab at Apollo Chen, saying he was computer illiterate, but the truth is they changed the rules of the game on him to prevent any more information leaks. The NEAR database is also where netizens discovered files from 1987 relevant to Tsai's qualifications, which were issued by the examination ministry. The discovery of that information rocked the top brass at the presidential office, prompting Tsai Ing-wen to dispatch Liu Jianxing to the examination yuan in order to take care of any other documents that might come back to bite her. On January 4, 2021, the NEAR database was overhauled. It was the biggest update in its 20-year existence. Everything from the interface to the contents of the database were changed. Furthermore, a login was now required in order to look up files. Government information should be public, so a login shouldn't be necessary to find any records. We tried searching for Tsai Ing-wen on the new website. Though we can still find old files, the number of categorization parameters have been reduced from 10 to 8. Displayed information has been simplified, meaning the efficacy of keywords in the database to elicit results has been vastly hampered. The removed categories are file classification, which determines what kind of document the file is, and the other disclosed whether the file in question is an original or a photocopy. This omitted information is key to Professor He Defen's lawsuit against the Ministry of Education. No one is above the law, not even the president. ThesisGate is a test of Taiwan's judicial independence and an indicator of what reforms are necessary. In addition to Dr. Dennis Pang's 3 ThesisGate cases, 2021 will see the addition of Professor He Defen's lawsuit against the Education Ministry. He is accusing the Education Ministry of incorrectly and needlessly classifying Tsai's career documents until 2049. The case had a pre-trial hearing on January 13th. The Education Ministry dispatched a lawyer to the hearing while Professor He answered judges' questions herself. Dr. Dennis Pang was present throughout. Administrative courts act as the primary justice mechanism between the public and the government. It is an institution that exists to reinforce the fact that the country belongs to the people. In the pre-trial hearing, the presiding judge asked Professor He to outline her grievances. Professor He proceeded to approach the stand and plead her case. She said the court should not refer to Tsai as president, but rather madame in the trial. Professor He then alleged that the Education Ministry did not have the right to classify Tsai's career files for a period as long as 65 years under administrative procedure.
那我们援引的法规是行政院文书处理手册里面有关一般公务机密的规定。那一般公务机密，它有涉及到行政运作以及个人安全隐私的资料是可以持续的做保密。
If all government institutions operated in the same way as the Education Ministry, then there is no need for the Classified National Security Information Protection Act to exist. All government agencies could instead cite administrative procedure in order to classify sensitive documents. Administrative procedure is meant to protect low-level documents and is not applicable to information about the president. Furthermore, in order to classify documents for 30 years, the maximum duration under proper laws must come from either the premier or the president. Administrative procedure in this instance has superseded constitutional and presidential authority. Professor He went for the throat and accused the Education Ministry of colluding with Tsai to hide her academic dishonesty. She said the lack of clarity behind Tsai's teaching career 37 years ago is already a failure on the Education Ministry's part. The ministry had no choice but to seal away her career documents in order to hide that ugly past. Professor He then asked whether the president is entitled to privacy. In a democratic society, even a president's health records must be public. Tsai Ing-wen should not be able to hide her teaching history behind personal information protection. Professor He requested that Tsai's career documents be declassified right away. As expected, the Education Ministry insisted that their use of administrative action was proper. The Education Ministry's lawyer told the judge that it abided by the Freedom of Government Information law in its dealings. It said that another government organization had already publicized Tsai's diploma and said it had already told Professor He where she could find it, defeating the need to declassify Tsai's career files. The judge differed from the appeal committee Professor He first turned to in that the judge did not feign ignorance about ThesisGate. The judge said it didn't make sense that the ministry could assert that the classified diploma was the same as the one the presidential office showed. He said the public was questioning the diploma the presidential office showed and wanted the ministry to come out with their version to compare. Instead, the Education Ministry was telling people to go check the presidential office's diploma to see the version it had. The Education Ministry's lawyer responded by saying the reason why they don't publicize the files in question is because it is personal and private information. However, because the presidential office publicized the diploma anyway, the Education Ministry took the opportunity to compare and verify it had the same one. The Education Ministry is cunning and manipulative in its choice of words. However, the judge said if certain government information falls under personal information protection, then the concerned party can be notified and issue an opinion within 10 days. If they agree to it, then personal and private information can be published. If the person does not agree to publicizing the information, then other courses of action can be considered. The judge asked whether the Education Ministry approached Tsai about publicizing her career information before placing the files under protection.
按照我们的公文文书处理，我们经过行政的判断之后，我们去做适当的隐匿，把它相关可能涉及到个人各自的
同意可以公开的。
这我们是经过我们内部的行政的程序。
最后签字是谁？
我们是经过内部行政程序啦，不好意思。
都不敢讲。
The judge practically asked the Education Ministry's lawyer whether it consulted Tsai on if she wanted to publicize her own information. So was the Education Ministry following internal procedure or the president's orders? The ministry's lawyer didn't dare say. He said he had to ask the original case handler. However, the ministry's reaction was tantamount to admitting that they did ask Tsai Ing-wen and that they took direction on what could and couldn't be publicized. The pre-trial hearing revealed another important point. Before the hearing, the Education Ministry's lawyer sent a notice saying the Education Ministry did not keep a copy of Tsai's 1984 thesis. If Professor He wanted the Education Ministry to provide her with a thesis, then she'd first have to prove the Education Ministry had a copy. However, the Education Ministry is in possession of all paperwork that would have served to authenticate Tsai's thesis when she became an instructor. It's ridiculous to think that Professor He is on the hook for proving the ministry has a copy of Tsai's thesis. Let's say the Education Ministry didn't keep a copy of Tsai's thesis. there would at least be a paper trail of where it went. The thesis would have been documented in Tsai's compiled CV, which would have been part of her record. Those records would have indicated which publications Tsai used to apply for employment and promotions. Professor He said the Education Ministry should be in possession of at least Tsai's CV. Not having it is a failure on their part. Let's take a look at the file the Presidential Office and the Education Ministry made public. The old NEAR database said that file was to be kept indefinitely. The file is a print document and is an original. Even if the file did not contain a thesis, then it would at least contain Tsai's CV from 1984. During the hearing, the judge directly asked the Education Ministry's lawyer whether or not the ministry possessed the files in question. He questioned why there were no pictures or photocopies. The judge asked whether any such file existed and whether it was an original or a photocopy. The lawyer responded by saying Tsai's CV was also her personal information. He said he'd look into the diploma and Tsai's publication. The judge said he wanted to know whether the Education Ministry had the files in question and not if the information was public or private. It's hard to think that the Education Ministry's lawyer couldn't come up with an answer for this straightforward question. He said he'd ask the original case handler. Professor He immediately took out records from a legislative hearing in which Higher Education Department Director General Zhu Junzang said,
教育部我们当时在收到政大所报过来的教师资格审查资料里面所附的毕业证书的影本，我们也有在跟政大这边所留存的毕业证书影本在做确认，这是一致的，所以证书是在经过比对之后表示没有问题。我们在7月19号。那时候的一个公布，其实我们公布的资料，我们都有把个人的相关包括开会的人员我们相关的个资，我们是都有隐匿起来。所以这个部分跟提供给委员7月19号的资料事实上跟在我们记者会公布是一致的。以上报告。
First of all, we know that the thesis that Zhu brought out on July 19th is the famous black leather book from 2019. We've proven before it is not a thesis. The Education Ministry may not have so much as a photocopy of the cover of Tsai's 1984 thesis. They can't even produce Tsai's CV, so it's necessary to ask, does Tsai's thesis even exist? It's fair to say that the Education Ministry doesn't have any information on Tsai's 1984 thesis. It said it returned everything to Tsai and put the burden of proof on her. The Education Ministry said it compared and verified Tsai's diploma. That means they must have a copy of Tsai's diploma from 1984. Otherwise, what would they have to compare? But why is it that the Education Ministry's lawyer won't even respond to inquiries about the diploma? Even more curious, Zhu Junzang said in a hearing that the diploma the Education Ministry had was the one the Presidential Office showed on September 23rd.
我跟委员报告，我们在比对这个时候都是以我们自己。我们并没有办法以外界提供，都是我们留存的。
现在有3份，是哪一份？
我们是以总统府9月23号记者会。
洪教授是这份吗？923号。
如果要比对的话，可以显示总统府9月23号的记者会简报资料第1页。总统府所公布的那个是这3者比对是一致的。
The Education Ministry lawyer's response once again cast doubt on whether or not the ministry has Tsai Ing-wen's 1984 diploma. Can the Education Ministry really pull out a legitimate 1984 diploma if pressed? If they did keep copies of a diploma from 1984, then why did the presidential office have to get a replacement diploma from the London School of Economics and show it off on September 4th, 2019? Isn't this strange? The judge summarized 3 questions the trial will seek to answer. 1. Does the defendant have the files the plaintiff is requesting?
被告教育部是否掌有？
2. Did the
原告
defendant
请求
process
公
the
开或
classified
提供资
information
讯
that the plaintiff
教育
wants
部是否
publicized
依法处
correctly?
理，满足原告的需求？第
3.
三，
Do the classified
封存到
documents abide by the
2049 年
Freedom
的
of
资料
Government
是否
Information
符
Act?
合政府资讯公开法的相关规定，
The
并且
judge
预
said
令
the
40
trial
天
would
后
begin 40 days
再
after
度
the
开
pretrial
庭
hearing.
审理。
We can
升
tell
等资
from the
料有多
Education
重要，
Ministry's attitude
从
during
教
the
育部
pretrial
不
hearing
惜花
just
费
how
人
important
民的纳
Tsai's
税
career
钱
files
聘
are.
律师来打诉讼就知道，这
They
里面
most
肯
certainly
定
contain
藏有
damning
证明
evidence.
蔡英文弊
Otherwise,
端
who
的证
wouldn't
据，
want to publicize
否则
such a
谁不想
prestigious
公开自己的
education?
学历来证明学位呢？之
In
前
our
的节
past
目
shows,
我们
we've
就曾经
hypothesized
推论过
that，the Tsai
蔡英文
organization's
集
ultimate
团最
goal
终的
is
目
to
的
use the
就是
education
用
ministry's
教育部
mechanisms
的公
to
文
prove the
证明
existence of a 1984
1984年的
thesis.
伦敦学位。
The
因为教育
Education
部彻
Ministry
底
is
受
well
总
under
统
the
府的
presidential
控制，
office's
你
control,
要多少
so
证
it
明
will
文件，
produce
就
whatever
有多
documents the
少证明文
presidential
件，
office tells it
还
to
可以
produce.
自己认
The
证自己。
Education Ministry can
但是
verify
相反
and
的，伦敦大
authenticate
学的
its
认
own
证文
documents.
件就很难
However,
搞
it
定
can't，easily
而且还要
authenticate
经过
third-party
第三方
documents
认
like
证。
ones from the
所以
University of
张敦
London.
涵案全面
Presidential
避
Office
免误
spokesperson
证上
Xavier
法
Chang
庭，
has avoided
就连
bringing
总统
forth
府
any
记者会
evidence in his
自
court
己提
case
供的
against
文
Dr.
件
Dennis
都不
Pang.
能
The
拿上法
Education
庭。
Ministry only brings
教
evidence
育部
that has
案
been
则是
vetted to
只
the
提供
courts.
筛
The
选
most
过后的
crucial
物
pieces of
证
evidence
上
are
法
not
庭，
submitted under the
但
pretense
是
that
关键
they're
的物
personal
证就
information.
以各自保
This
护
attempt to
来
fabricate
搪
a
塞，
falsified
来
degree
完
by
成
altering
用
historical
教育部
records
的公
is the
文
con of the
证明
century.
1984年的伦敦学位的世纪诈骗。
No matter
尽管
what
蔡
Tsai's
英文集团
organization
想得
does,
很美，
it can't travel
但
through
是他们
time.
最大
It
的
will
致命
always
伤
be at odds
仍
with
旧
records
是
of the
无
past
法
and
穿
the
越
truth.
时空的年份问题。
Tsai
就像
can't
蔡英文无
create
法
an
伪造一
authentic
份
degree
37
from
年前的
37
论
years
文，
ago. The
教育部
Education
同样
Ministry
也无法伪
cannot
造
create
37 年
authentic
前的
government
公
documents
文。
from 37 years ago
在旧
either.
的机关
In
档
the
案
old
查
Near
询网，
database, we see
我们
that
可以
all
看到
files are
所有的
original
公
print
文保
documents with
存
an
方式
indefinite retention
都是
period.
永久
Therefore, if
纸
we
本
can get our hands
而
on
且
Tsai's
是
career
正
files,
本。
then we'll be
因
able
此，
to
只要
work
拿出
backward
当
and
时的
determine
升
what
等
is
资料
real and，what
鉴
is
定
fake.
纸张的年份，就能够还原公文的真假。这些都是无法加工伪造的。
The
但
new
是
Near database doesn't
新的机
indicate
关
whether
档案
documents
查
are
询网
originals or
却悄
photocopies.
悄地把
The
公
National
文
Development
正
Council,
本、
which
影本
oversees
的
NEAR,
栏
can
目
phase
给
out
移
print
除了。
documents in favor
这
of
不是很
digital
奇怪吗？
files, which can be tampered
同
with
时，国
easily
发会
under
可
the
以借着
pretense
无
of
纸化
going
数位发展，
paperless.
修
The
改
NDC
公文
can
正
opt
本
to
保存
change
年
the
限，
retention period
从
of
永
physical
久
documents
改
to
为
30
30年。
years. After
30
30
年后，
years,
文件
all
全面
paper
数位
files
化，
can
影
then be
本保存，
digitized and eliminated.
教育部就可以
Through these
突
means,
破
the
纸
government
张
can
年
get
份的
around the
问题，
limitations of time
大
and
大
of the
方方
past.
把当
30
年
years
有
from
关
now,
蔡英文
Tsai's
论文
sealed
门
files
弊
will
端
be
正本
destroyed,
纸本
leaving
的资
nothing
料
but a
通
fabricated
通销
digital
毁，
record of an
只留下
undeserved
数位版
doctorate
本的
completing
伪造
Tsai's
公文。
charade.
蔡英文37年来的论文门就可以彻底解套，再也无人可以质疑他的学术诈骗。这
That is the
就
reason
是
why
机关
NEAR
档案
had
查
its
询
first
网
major
20年
overhaul
后
in
突
20
然
years,
进行
so the
大改
Education
版的最
Ministry
主
can
要目
alter
的，
history.
让教
It's
育部可
also
以
the
为
reason why
所
in
欲为的
2019
捏造
prosecutors
历史。
refused
也
to
难
place
怪
crucial
2019年
pieces
张
of
敬礼政
ThesisGate
华律师
evidence
5
under
度要求
protective
黄伟
custody
检察官
at the
保
behest
全
of
证据，
our lawyers.
全都
This
被
is
驳
the
回，
ultimate
没有理
purpose
由
of。Tsai's
这
firewall,
正是
to
蔡
give
英文
herself
论文门防
credentials
火 迫强处心积虑要完成的目的。但是用尽心机总未安，所有的观众朋友们，我们都是见证人，我们正目睹一场逐渐扩大的世纪丑闻进行时。相信我们早就做好应对的准备。蔡英文集团这样的行径，只会突然增加论文门的涉案公务人员。论文门就是一场台湾社会的照妖镜，看学者如何泯灭良知。看 看官员如何违法滥权。当论文门破案的那一天，就是台湾政治改革的起点。大家加油吧！